ends today. Imperious.
Alright folks, today I'm going to be showing you how I made Shadiversity's original sword, Imperious, from his upcoming novel. And he actually made an entire 3D model for it. That makes my job so much easier because I've got all the references I'll ever need. This one's a little different from the stuff I've made before. Let me explain why.
Let's hear it.
Now the guard here is too intricate to be even remotely sturdy if made of foam, and plus it would take forever. So it needed to be made out of something solid, like plastic, and that's where my 3D printer comes in. But here's the icing on the cake. Shad made the 3D model for that sword, which means I don't have to replicate it myself. I simply needed to load the model, isolate the guard, export it as a file the printer can read, and just upload it to the printer. The 3D print took about 11 hours to do, and I was so anxious about it, I may or may not have sat next to it the entire time. Because apparently I've got 11 hours just lying around sitting
From behind a conveniently placed rock.
Anyway, after removing the completed print from the printer bed, taking off all the support material, and giving it a bit of sandpaper treatment, that was pretty much it for the guard as far as construction goes. Oh, and I took a wood burner tool and melted a hole through the middle of the guard to make space for the steel rod that would later serve to support the entire sword. The next thing to do was the handle, which is kind of unusual for me because when I make sword replicas, I typically start with the blade and work my way down, but in the case of Imperious, I started with the hilt. So I hope you can handle that. Now this piece was pretty simple. I just stacked together 2 layers of 10mm foam, cut it to shape, and sanded all the edges to make it ergonomic. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the handle. The next thing to do was the pommel. To end thine opponent rightly! Now for the pommel, I stacked 3 layers of 10mm foam, cut it in the shape of an octagon, and used a Dremel to shape it into a circle. Now the pommel kind of flares out from the middle to the edge, so to get the circular bevels, I just cut those off with my box cutter. And these bevels are actually slightly concave, and to achieve that effect, I used the Dremel. As for all the detail pieces on the pommel, like this star-shaped thing, I cut out all the shapes using 2mm foam. Now on the circumference of this pommel are these little bumps, and these bumps align with all the points of the star. And upon adding those, that's what really made this pommel shine, in my opinion. Now it was time to put the entire hilt together. When I cut the socket out for the metal rod to fit in the handle, that socket was too big and the rod was loose. So to get the rod to fit in there nice and snug, I had to sort of increase the circumference of the rod. To do so, I just added a bit of Worbla to it. And that seems to have done the trick. And after gluing the handle, pommel, and guard together to the rod, the hilt was complete, and it was time to begin work on the blade. Now this blade was pretty tricky for me to make, for 2 reasons.
Are you listening?
One, it has a fuller, which is this kind of groove or trench on the flat of the blade. On historical swords, the purpose of fullers is to make the blade lighter, and therefore more nimble to use. And 2, part of the blade goes through this ring into the guard here, which means that once I glue it in place, I can't reach it with my Dremel. And this part does have rounded bevels on the corners. I'll address how I overcame these 2 challenges here in a moment, but the blade is made of 2 layers of foam, one 10mm and one 2mm. The 10mm piece has a socket in it for that rod to fit in, and to get that, I just carved it out with an X-Acto knife. To get the fuller, I added a piece of 2mm foam on both sides of the blade, but with the shape of the fuller cut out. Now to deal with the problem with the ring of the guard, I glued together just the part of the blade that goes through the ring, and gave it the smoothness and the rounded bevels it needed with the Dremel. The part of the blade that isn't sharp, called the ricasso, has rounded bevels on the corners. You can see that in Shad's 3D model. Once that was done, I threaded the steel rod through the socket, and glued the entire ricasso to the hilt. Then it was time to glue together the rest of the blade. And that's exactly what I did. Glad to be out of that sticky situation. With the whole blade glued together, and roughly in form, it was time to refine it and get it closer to its final form. I sanded down all the edges to make it even using the Dremel, and gave the ricasso the rest of the rounded bevels. To get the edge bevel of the blade, the sharp part, as well as the taper for the tip, I cut off all the excess foam with my box cutter, and sanded everything down with the Dremel. This process took a while too, and generated a lot of foam dust. I hate foam dust. It's coarse.
God, I hate your movie references.
And to reinforce the whole tip of the sword, I encased the whole thing in Worbla. For those gems on that diamond shape, there aren't exactly any mass-produced rhinestones that look like that. So I had to make the gems myself. So I took a thin sheet of yellow acrylic and cut it to shape with my bandsaw. These gems also have bevels on them, so to get those I ground them off using the Dremel, but the Dremel left a lot of really rough scratch marks all over it. So I ground those bevels by hand using sandpaper of higher and higher grits. And to finish it off, I used the Dremel again, but with a different drum. This was a cotton spool. I've never been so pleased with something like these before.
She is a gem.
And that was pretty much it as far as construction goes, so then it was time to prime and paint. I used the same stuff I always do for priming, namely black PlastiDip, and after covering the handle, part of the pommel, and the ricasso with painter's tape, I applied a coat of metallic gold spray paint onto the guard and the part of the pommel that wasn't covered. And to get the closest I could to this indigo periwinkle color on Shad's 3D model, I experimented with different mixes of blue and purple paint.
Last poor son of a gun got blue paint.
I also kind of needed to make this blade look enchanted, like it was made of some kind of gem or precious stone. So to do that, I did the same thing I did with parts of the fabled Glory Keyblade, which I did make some videos on, you can watch them here. I started with one uniform coat of ocean blue across the entire blade. Once that dried, I added another uniform coat, this time with metallic blue paint. And the last layer of paint to add was metallic purple. This one was not uniform, this was more diffuse and scattered. So instead of applying a uniform coat, I stippled that paint on. And the metallic purple was it, as far as the paint goes. And now it's time to rock the acrylic gems. And those, I just super glued in place. And wow, that reflective tape really helps to keep that vibrant yellow color. Kinda like my skin. And the very last thing to do was to seal it. And to do that, I applied some glossy varnish spray. And we are done! That's my replica of Imperious by Shadiversity. I am really pleased with the blue color and the really exquisite guard, with all the rings and the spikes and whatnot. I'm very happy to have had the 3D printer needed to make it. And I think Shad did an awesome job modeling it too. And that guard could not have been easy to make at all. There's just these little things that can happen when you're modeling something complex like that. And so you must be on your guard at all times.
Get away from me.
And I'm very honored to have been able to make something for him. And I'm very glad Shad is happy with it too. If you've got any suggestions for stuff for me to make in the future, or just general feedback about the content itself, the comment section is the best place to go for that. I read and reply to every single one of them. Yes, even the negative ones. And if you're a cosplayer yourself and you've made something that's been inspired by my content, please send me pictures of your completed work either through Facebook or Instagram, and I will give you a shout out at the end of the video. I want some tangible results to show people that my content is helpful. And hey, a subscription count higher than 518 is always nice, but that's up to you. But that's gonna do it for this one, folks. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video, and I shall see you in the next build.